Hey, everybody. I'm excited to be here. I've got an outstanding guest with an outstanding topic, Dr. Barb. We're going to talk about the miracle mineral, magnesium. Nobody knows this mineral better than Dr. Barb. This is going to be exciting. She's a naturopath from Canada. She does both virtual and in-person treatments. She's a forerunner in functional medicine. And like I said before, nobody knows this miracle mineral better than Dr. Barb. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me. I love talking about this mineral and I'm excited for our talk today.
Without question, you do a great job. I mean, that's how I found you. I mean, there you are every day sharing an insight on magnesium. And we had this conversation before that sometimes in the functional medicine tree, we go so high, but we don't look at the basics. And
Yeah.
magnesium is without question a basic. So, a little introduction to magnesium. What is magnesium, and really why is it so important for overall health?
So magnesium is a mineral and it's an essential mineral. So that means that it has to come into the body through either supplementation or through food. So it's not made in the body. And this vital mineral is involved in so many biochemical reactions. So, as of the latest research in December of 2023, it's been shown to be involved in about 800 enzymatic reactions. And so, what that means in plain English is that it does a lot of things for a lot of the processes that happen in the body. And so, if we just want to do a quick refresher on what enzymes are, these are proteins that are going to act as kind of catalysts in these biochemical reactions. And so, what they do is they help speed up the reactions that are necessary for life. And so, magnesium is or acts as the cofactor of these enzymes. And so that is why it is such an important mineral, because if you don't have the cofactor, you're not going to have the reaction happen efficiently or even properly in some instances. So we also know it's the fourth most abundant mineral in our body. And of course, it plays a role in many different areas of our health. So muscle, nerve function, it helps keeps our heartbeat steady, it supports our immune system, keeps our bones strong, helps regulate insulin and blood glucose levels. And of course, probably the most important, it's involved in the production of energy and proteins. And so, as I said, it's a totally essential mineral. If we want to be healthy, we want to be well, we need to be sufficient in the amount of this mineral in our body. And just to put it out there, there is a study that actually reports that if you are deficient in this mineral, you are twice as likely to die. And so I know it's not a fun fact, but it
Mm.
is that important.
I mean, there's a plethora of things that you just listed that magnesium does. I think one of the biggest takeaways is 800 bodily functions. I've read 600. Everybody loves to
Yes,
say 300. In
yes,
your new data, 800. Wow. It's also been called a macro mineral. And I
mhm.
know you're smiling now because a macro mineral is only one of seven. You have to have over 100 mgs per day, milligrams. What's
Right.
the proper dosage for magnesium through the different stages of life and sexes, etc.?
There is something we call the recommended dietary allowance. And this is pretty much an amount that is on every vitamin and mineral. So for magnesium, we have for adults ranging anywhere from 300 to 420 milligrams. In children, it can be anywhere from 80 to 240 milligrams, depending upon their age. Now, the RDA, we have to remember that that is the average daily nutrient intake that is going to be sufficient to meet the requirements or for us to avoid deficiency. So it's, a lot of people ask me, is the RDA actually enough? And my answer is, it might not be. And it's because we have to look at the deficiency, the things that actually make us deficient in magnesium. It's not just our poor soils and our food sources, but there are other things that deplete our magnesium levels. And so when we look at when the RDA for magnesium was last updated, that was in 1997.
Mm.
And we know that the RDA is based on body weight, average body weight. And in 1997, the average body weight for males or females was around 135 to 165 pounds. So now in 2022, that is now between 165 pounds and 200 pounds. So right away, we're seeing this discrepancy, which then has to suggest that possibly the RDA for magnesium isn't probably going to be enough for the average individual.
You make a truly key takeaway there in the fact that 27 years ago, 25 from one part of the study to the other, there's a 30-pound difference because in America, North America, 75% of Americans are overweight or obese. So we
Right.
have to dose. And you're making a really good point. Number one, most Americans, I think it's 70%, are magnesium deficient. But you made a great point that dosing, you dose according to weight. So I want to like put you on the spot a little bit. Let's talk about that. And let's talk about male versus female dosing.
Yeah, so I personally do not dose specific to weight. So, how I dose is I look at a patient's lifestyle factor. So, I look at everything that could be possibly depleting magnesium. So, when we look at what depletes magnesium, yes, we know that, like I said, the soil depletion, we're not getting the same amount of nutrients in our foods. Maybe they're taking in, they have the standard American diet. So they're not eating a lot of magnesium rich foods. So they have this poor dietary intake. Do they have a gastrointestinal disease or illness where they can absorb their nutrients? Are they athletes? Do they sweat a lot? Do they drink alcohol? Do they have insulin resistance? Right. So if we have this obese population, we know that 1 out of 3 patients are going to be insulin resistant, and we know that this depletes our magnesium. Are they stressed? We also know that stress is a big thing in our society, and this is going to deplete magnesium. So medications are another big thing. 1 out of 3 patients are on medications, and some of the more common medications like the proton pump inhibitors, the statins, the birth control pills, these are all depleting magnesium levels. And so when we're looking at dosing, we really want to look at how much are we depleting magnesium from the body in order to know how much we need to bring in? Because if I just go by the weight and I go by, the RDA and maybe the extra that's missing, then I could possibly be underdosing in a situation where someone is maybe stressed, has insulin resistance, is on medication, and doesn't eat well.
So the bulk of our patients are probably magnesium deficient. You would agree with that? Can you share some
Yes.
signs and symptoms so some of the practitioners and the consumers out there know to look for?
Yes. So in the research, we have a fairly wide range, but probably between 50 and 70% of the population is deficient in magnesiums. Now, here's the other problem before we go into the signs and symptoms is that we have lots of studies that have shown that normal magnesium blood serum levels doesn't actually equate to magnesium sufficiency. So because magnesium is found mostly in the bones and the tissues, and only 1% of magnesium is in the extracellular space, so in the serum, in the blood, it's really hard to test and get an accurate amount of magnesium. Now, when we go to the doctors, they run this serum magnesium. So it's only really testing 1% of magnesium in the actual body. And so this is where we can see sufficient serum magnesium, but deficiency when it comes to the actual amount of magnesium in the body. And in order to, in the research, they use obviously muscle biopsies and tissue biopsies, which is a little bit invasive for the average patient. But we have to keep that in mind. So a lot of the signs and symptoms of magnesium deficiency also belong to other health issues. And so this is why a lot of them get, overlooked, and magnesium isn't really part of the equation. So we can have things like muscle cramps and spasms, Fatigue, because it's so involved in energy production and ATP, we often see low energy, fatigue, weakness, even nausea, vomiting, because that is all an energy component, numbness, tingling, abnormal heart rhythms or heart rates. We have anxiety, depression, insomnia, stress. So a lot of these symptoms are actually symptoms of other health issues. And like I said, we often overlook them and we don't actually, we go down that route of that other health issue and we don't kind of look at, okay, is this person actually sufficient in this mineral that actually plays a role in all of these things?
Wow. So magnesium deficiencies, what would cause it? What and tackle my favorite drink, Java, coffee.
Coffee is a diuretic. And so we have to remember that magnesium is an electrolyte, right? So it follows as an electrolyte with sodium and potassium and chloride. So when we have caffeine or we have a lot of sweating, so athletes, as I said earlier, we lose magnesium through the kidneys because of the diuretic component. So sweating, we're obviously sweating it out. Caffeine, we're actually losing it through the kidneys. But we also lose it in many other ways. As I mentioned earlier, we can lose it from, if we just look at the insulin resistance or the obesity and type 2 diabetes, we know that anybody that has any of those conditions is likely depleting their magnesium quite quickly. And so when we have, for instance, like high insulin in insulin resistance or even in type 2 diabetes, we know that insulin affects the kidney's ability to reabsorb magnesium. So when we have those high levels of insulin, it causes the kidneys to actually excrete more magnesium into the urine. And so this occurs because insulin actually influences the activity of the renal transporters
Mm.
and channels. And so this is why this whole thing happens. And so when they're elevated, it's going to lead to more increased loss. But here's the interesting thing, because I call it like a cycle of depletion when it comes to insulin. And because there's this bi-directional relationship between magnesium and insulin, we know that low magnesium levels worsens insulin resistance and high insulin levels are going to deplete magnesium, as I said. So it creates this like vicious cycle where when we don't have enough magnesium or we have inadequate amounts of magnesium, it exasperates the insulin resistance, which then leads, of course, to higher insulin levels, which then, of course, depletes magnesium. So you can see how just this one specific thing like insulin resistance or diabetes or type 2 diabetes or even obesity where we have blood glucose dysregulation, we can see how it impacts magnesium to a great degree. And so we have this, what, like I said, cycle of depletion because we're depleting as fast as we're repleting. And at the end, we end up with less magnesium.
Which really begs the question, is it magnesium deficiency? Or is it these problems that you aforementioned? Or like you said, they're bidirectional. So
Right.
is magnesium the canary in the coal mine?
We would need to address both situations, right? Because you wouldn't be able to stop one with the other. So, yes, so like you would need to address the insulin or the blood sugar dysregulation in order to address the magnesium that you're actually losing. And this goes back to when I said about the dosing. So if you have a type 2 diabetic, you know that their dosing is going to be much different than somebody who is not a type 2 diabetic because they have this vicious cycle happening all the time and you need to kind of get a hold of it. And so making sure that you work on that insulin resistance or that blood sugar regulation is going to help them try to keep some of that magnesium in the body.
Well, clearly the next question, I hear my patients in the background saying, Rob, ask Dr. Barb, can I get it from food and which foods are enriched with magnesium or i.e. higher magnesium levels?
Yeah, for sure. I'm never against getting our nutrition or our nutrients through food. Now, We do have to accept the fact that soil depletion has happened, farming has changed. We have a lot of changes that have gone on in the agricultural space. And so our foods don't contain the same nutrition or nutrient amounts as they probably did 20 years ago. But there are still some excellent sources of magnesium rich foods. And so a lot of them are going to be plant-based foods because this is where we find magnesium. So leafy green vegetables, your kales, your spinach, your all your different lettuces, nuts and seeds. I think the biggest bang for your buck for magnesium would be pumpkin seeds.
Mm.
So it can pretty much give you around 300 milligrams of magnesium for about a quarter to a half a cup of pumpkin seeds. So this is really good. Adding them into your salads, adding them into different foods is a good way of getting them in. We know almonds and walnuts are also good. Brazil nuts are good for magnesium, whole grains, so quinoa, buckwheat, some brown rice. Legumes, if you can handle them, such as black beans or chickpeas, they're also higher. Now, there are a couple fish that are higher in magnesium, and those are going to be your more fattier fishes, so salmon and mackerels. Bananas, we often think of bananas as high potassium, but they're also high magnesium. And so they are a good source as well. Avocados, and of course, everybody's favorite, dark chocolate, right? So dark chocolate is a really good, but there's a caveat here. You have to have at least 70% cacao.
Mm.
So you can't just have like the 20% sometimes that you see. So it needs to be a higher end dark chocolate. And so that is also a good source of magnesium. So incorporating some of these foods can be really beneficial. And actually, there was a study that came out in March of 2023 where they looked at 6,000 participants and they had them between ages 40 and 73. And so, what they were looking at were neurological disorders. And what they gave these people, and they followed these people for 16 months, was dietary magnesium. So, this was not supplementation, this was magnesium rich foods. And what they found was that 550 milligrams of dietary magnesium intake improved brain health. So it related to better brain health, it related to a lower risk of dementia and cognitive decline. And that was found particularly in women. So, especially postmenopausal women. And so it's interesting that it's 550 milligrams, which is already over our RDA.
All right. Let's go over the big hurdle now. You said postmenopausal women, and we know that the menopausal transition period, the proverbial 10-year period, is very challenging for both the practitioner and the female. Where
Right.
does magnesium play in menopausal transition?
Yeah, so it actually touches on a lot of different areas. It in perimenopause, menopause, we have the hormones kind of all over the place. We have estrogen going down, we have progesterone maybe not where we want it to be, and things are fluctuating quite dramatically. And so we see also a lot of mood issues in this time frame. So magnesium is going to help by supporting neurotransmitter functions. It helps to reduce anxiety, helps to improve mood, helps improve and support GABA. We can also see it helping. We know hot flashes and night sweats are a big thing when estrogen starts to decline. And so magnesium is going to help regulate that body temperature and lessen the severity or even the frequency of these hot flashes and night sweats. And a big complaint I get from my postmenopausal, even my menopausal and perimenopausal patients is that their sleep gets disrupted.
Mm.
And magnesium plays a huge role in sleep and improving sleep quality. And again, it goes in and it supports the GABA receptors. And by promoting the GABA, it promotes relaxation. It helps to turn down anxiety and the active glutamate that's actually happening. And so it improves sleep quality. And it also helps with disruption of sleep. So it can help to keep you staying asleep longer, which is obviously another issue that we see a lot of.
Right.
Another big one Sorry, did you have a question?
No, no, no. Keep going. You're on fire.
Oh,
Oh, get away.
and a big question or a big thing we see with perimenopause and menopause is bone health. And so this is, I think, where magnesium really shines as well. A lot of us think bone health, calcium, vitamin D. The problem is magnesium is going to play an extremely beneficial role when it comes to bone health because, first of all, magnesium is required if you want your vitamin D to be activated and metabolized in the body. So you can take vitamin D, but if you don't have enough magnesium, that vitamin D isn't going to do what it needs to do. And it's supposed to support health and bone health and immune system function and all of these things. But if we're deficient, then we don't get that same response. So when we're looking at bone health, we can see that magnesium helps in activating and metabolizing that vitamin D, but it also helps in calcium absorption and bone density maintenance, which are so crucial. And we know that it helps in osteoblast and osteoclast formations. And so these things are all really, really important as a woman transitions from perimenopause into menopause into postmenopause. And so magnesium should be a big part of that transitional stage, if not for bone health alone. We do know that it balances hormones, so it can balance estrogen and progesterone levels, and it's also involved in the production and regulation of those hormones, which a lot of people don't realize. So, when we're having these fluctuations, magnesium can kind of come in and stabilize some of those. And then finally, of course, your energy levels. I mean, everybody at the cellular level is kind of affected by a decrease in energy during this transition. And so energy production from magnesium can definitely, combat some of that fatigue and that, just lack of motivation that we get when we're just so tired.
So magnesium, great for sleep. Magnesium, great in a ratio. So let's take it one step at a time. Magnesium and sleep. When should I take my magnesium with my other nutrients to help me get a better night's sleep, whether it be melatonin, L-theanine, GABA, like you mentioned, etc.
Yeah, so the best time if we're going to look at it for sleep is we want to kind of take it 30 to 60 minutes before bed. And so this is kind of the time that it needs to kind of get in there and do what it needs to do so that by the time you're ready to go to bed, it's kind of already doing its thing. Some individuals who are a little bit more sensitive to magnesium, they may want to take it a couple of hours before bed just because they actually get either slower progression of magnesium or sometimes quicker. So it'll actually let them go to bed earlier, or they just need that time frame in order for it to kind of get into the system and do its thing. But normally 30 to 60 minutes before bed.
Now, those ratios you talked about, magnesium to calcium in a normal multivitamin with vitamin D, there's a standard ratio, typically a 2-to-1 ratio. You can go through that. And then there's inverted ratios when you have muscle spasms. So a lot of people ask me why the dosage changes pending on the condition. If you could address that and give us some clarity, that would be great.
Yeah, so I don't often give calcium on its own at all, unless it's absolutely necessary. And even then, I'm giving it in a formula because we just don't have great research to show that calcium on its own is going to do what it needs to do. And it often ends up in the wrong place, especially in those menopausal years. We don't want that calcium ending up in the arteries. We really want it going to the bones. And so usually what I'll do is I will start with, if they don't have like an osteopenia or an osteoporosis kind of picture, I will start with magnesium on its own with a vitamin D3, K2. And so this way, we get a lot of calcium from food. We often get more than what we actually think. And even individuals who are dairy free are getting that 1,500 milligrams of calcium. And so We don't want to overdo calcium because, again, if you are magnesium deficient or you don't have enough magnesium, you're not going to break down the calcium. And then that is going to lead to stones, spurs, deposits that we don't want happening. So normally that is where I start. And we know that with D3 and K2, it's directing it to the bones. And we know that magnesium also has a little bit of a K2 where it makes sure that it's directed to the bone and not to other places. But with that combo together, we can really do well when we're supporting bone health. Now, if the individual is more towards osteopenia, osteoporosis, then I will choose usually a bone formula that has a little bit of calcium in it, but also all the other minerals. We often isolate some of these things on their own, and we know that they work nicely synergistically rather than on their own. And so I will often use a bone formula instead of just giving straight calcium. And I know the recommendation from most conventional doctors is go home, take, 1,000 milligrams of calcium, and they don't give them any other support besides that.
Fascinating stuff. So this really begs the question, magnesium supplementation. There's a litany of different types of supplementation and forms. Do you want to go through some
Yes.
of yeah, please get some, again, like I said before, let's have some clarity.
Yeah, for sure. There are, I believe, last count, there were 17 different forms of magnesium. Now, some of those are used in hospital settings only. Some of them are used in clinical research only. So the ones I'm going to go over are the ones that people can readily find in health food stores or on the stores of any, or on the shelves of any stores they purchase supplements from. So we have magnesium citrate. So this form of magnesium kind of was like the more popular form before bisglycinate came on the scene, or glycinate. But it's absorbable. It's often used, or I use it for improving digestion. So if I have somebody with GERD, if I have somebody who has constipation issues, I will use this form of magnesium. There's also some research to show that 600 milligrams of citrate has been helpful in migraines as well. So either prevention or even right at the beginning of a migraine. So that citrate can also be used for sleep, although I don't often recommend it because it is an osmotic laxative, right? So we have to be careful when we're dosing citrate that we're not dosing too high too quickly, because it does bring water into the bowel and it does help with bowel movements. But if we give too much too quickly, then that can obviously result in some very loose stools, or if not diarrhea. So that would be the first form. The second form is bisglycinate, magnesium bisglycinate, or glycinate. They are exactly the same. It's one of the most common questions I get. Just some companies prefer to put the bis in front of the glycinate, just meaning 2 molecules of glycine. I love this form because I feel like it's a great all-around form. It kind of touches on a lot of different things. It's well absorbed. It's really easy on the stomach. It's good for, like I said, general supplementation. It bypasses the digestive system, so it doesn't need stomach acid to actually do its absorption. So it's good for people who have absorption issues, especially GI issues. And it's great for sleep and stress. Clinically, it's been looked at for pain, muscle spasms, insomnia, some mood disorders. So it has a pretty wide range, and it's fairly inexpensive form of magnesium. Then we have L-threonate, which is kind of the newer kid on the block when it comes to magnesium forms. And it's solely kind of looks, it's very good for brain health. If you're looking to do anything with the brain, memory, concentration, cognitive function, they've used it in dementia and cognitive decline patients. It crosses the blood-brain barrier. So it's a little more pricier, but it has some really great research when it comes to anything cognitive related. One of the research studies they have for this form of magnesium is in cognitive decline patients, and they were able to reduce brain age by 9 years with 12 weeks of supplementation of L-threonate. So really a powerful form of magnesium. And then we have magnesium malate. And I like to use malate when I see a lot of muscle pains, a lot of fatigue, because it's malic acid, it's going through the Krebs cycle. It's great for people who have low energy or just chronic fatigue and chronic fatigue syndromes. I use it for my fibromyalgia patients because it helps them with their fatigue as well as some of the pain that they experience. It's great for removing heavy metals like aluminum. So I sometimes will put it in for those types of people who are trying to get some of these heavy metals out of their bodies. Malate seems to be a really good form. Then we have some less common forms like orotate and taurate that are really heart health specific. So if you have anything to do with heart related conditions, blood pressure, heart disease, angina, any of these heart rhythms that are abnormal, those are kind of the more very specific forms of magnesium that help there. And then the ones we don't want to use specifically are oxide. Obviously, oxide is not bioavailable. We absorb less than 5% of it. At best, I use it in my severely constipated individuals because it's a great laxative. But it's definitely not something I would be taking to improve the function of anything in the body, or to, replete a magnesium deficient state. And then hydroxide, which is kind of like oxide. They use it in a lot of the over-the-counter antacids. Again, it's very poorly absorbed, and it's there to do its one thing when it comes to antacids, but it's not really a magnesium we want to be taking for anything specific, or to even replete any of our magnesium stores.
Outstanding. So just to recap, we'll talk about magnesium citrate. Great point. Data reveals that 600 milligrams, outstanding choice for migraines. I've read over 800 milligrams. It'll turn the patient into a secretariat, and it's great for constipation.
Yes.
Magnesium glycinate, bisglycinate, great for absorption, especially into muscle. That's the form probably most typically used. And for me, the Star Spangled Banner, comes out when I see magnesium L-threonate, 2016 study by MIT. 2 grams, interestingly enough, decreases brain aging by 9 to 14%, increases brain magnesium by 15%, also decreases the incidence of amyloid plaquing in Alzheimer's by 80%. And that magnesium also shown to increase akkermansia in the gut, which hopefully you can piggyback on, which is the new hot probiotic that we talk about, giving us immune health and mucin levels that heal in the gut.
Yeah. And actually, if we even look at some of the newer research they're doing in mood disorders for L-threonate, that makes very much sense that it is impacting our gut health, because we know that a lot of our anxiety and depression is inflammatory and has a gut-brain connection. And so, yes, that definitely is a really interesting thing with L-threonate. And the research is really starting to rev up on this form of magnesium, because of its like very specific functions, but it targets so many different things in the body.
So let's flip it to capsules, liquids, powders. Which are better? Why? Which do you recommend?
Yeah, I mean, I think If we can do capsules, they're usually going to be the easiest, and they're going to have the least amount of non-medicinal ingredients. So a lot of the times when we look at liquids and we look at powders, they're if and I often tell patients, look at the non-medicinal ingredients because that is all in your supplement. And so if we're taking a supplement that has a ton of sugar in it because they want it to taste good, or it has a ton of additives and colors, and I have seen unbelievable things in these non-medicinal. I have even seen aluminum. So it's not something we want to be doing. We're kind of defeating the purpose. So I think capsules, if capsules are okay for that person to take, those are going to be the easiest. They have the least amount of non-medicinal ingredients, and they're usually just the capsule and the stearate, which holds the capsule together. Now, liquids are obviously going to be very beneficial for a younger population, also people who can't swallow capsules. We also know that liquids sometimes can have better absorption because it's faster and it's suitable for maybe somebody who does have digestive issues. There are definitely clean liquids out there. You just have to make sure that you're reading the label. And then powders are probably last on the list. Again, they're good for younger population that can't swallow pills, or anybody who can't swallow pills, but it's a little bit more inflexible because you have to mix it usually with some water, or you have to put it in some form of liquid juice or something, and then of course the dilution is involved in that, so not always flexible and not always convenient for most people, but it is there if that person can't find a liquid and can't swallow a capsule.
How young would you recommend somebody taking a magnesium supplement?
I have given magnesium to probably 4 and 5 year olds, especially if they're on the side of ADHD or ADD. They are often deficient in magnesium, but I've also given it to 2 and 3 year olds when we've seen constipation in these toddlers. And for them, it's not an easy thing because they can't voice what's wrong. Oftentimes, they don't know. And so, magnesium seems to be a gentle thing for them to use, as well as it helps, treat that constipation. So, you just have to be easier on the dosing, obviously using magnesium forms that are going to be gentle, right? So we don't, I mean, in more severe cases, we will use oxide, but we don't tend to go there first because it does cause a lot of GI upset.
And last, I see a rise in transdermal usage of vitamin D. Is it effective? And which recommendations do you have for that?
So transdermal applications for magnesium are really, a few years ago, you used to see maybe a gel or an oil, but now we're seeing oils, gels, we're seeing bath salts, flakes, we're seeing creams. All of these transdermal applications are available now on the market, and they're great. And they're great for people who need to maybe get magnesium and bypass that whole digestive system. Some people are very sensitive to magnesium, and they will get loose stool even on a very low dose of magnesium. So we will use the transdermal form, and it seems to not cause those issues. We also use it for anybody who has really bad GI issues or people that just can't absorb things orally. But there's a little bit of a drawback with transdermal. There hasn't been a lot of research to show how much we actually absorb. So we know we absorb. We know that all of these methods, whether it's the oil, the gel, the Epsom salt baths, the magnesium flakes, the creams, we know that we're absorbing it through the skin. We just don't have that evidence of how much we're actually absorbing. So the effectiveness is there. We just don't know the quantity of it. And so when I'm doing this, I try not to make it just the transdermal. I'll try to get them, if they can't take supplementation, I'll try to improve their dietary aspect of magnesium, but I'm usually not doing transdermal alone just because we don't know that we're getting a certain amount and most people are going to absorb differently. Some people absorb really well, some people don't absorb at all. So that research is still starting to, I mean, we had just recently one research that is showing like the absorption is definitely there. And, it does change between individuals. We just don't really know how much. So that research, I hope, is going to come out, in the years to come so we can use some of these applications maybe more therapeutically than we are.
Last question, magnesium with or without food? Get asked that all the time.
And this is going to depend on how that individual takes or can handle magnesium. I like magnesium on an empty stomach or without food. However, that is not always an option for most people. So some people will have GI upset, some people will not feel good. They just don't do well. So in those cases, we would then take it with food. It's not the end of the world taking it with food. It's just some of it competes with our foods, obviously. So if I were to say, primarily, we'd like to take it on an empty stomach, but it is not necessary if you can't do it that way.
Wow. I mean, you just gave us a surfeit number of key takeaways. I'm just curious, how did you come about magnesium and this zest for information and this key elucidation of it?
Actually, through my practice. So in Canada, naturopathic doctors are not covered by the medical system. Like we have public health care. So you go to the doctor and, the Ontario Health Insurance Plan picks up the cost of that. So people that come to naturopathic doctors in Ontario come for two reasons. One, to prevent disease or illness. And two, when they've been told by the medical system, there's really not much more they can do with them. So we kind of are this last ditch option that some of these patients will come and see. And when I started in practice, originally, I had quite a number of those patients. And I was like, you'd have to just spend hours in research just trying to see what you could do for these people. And one of the minerals that kept coming up in the research was magnesium. And I was like, what have I got to lose? So I would send them home with like a larger dose magnesium. And I'd say, check in with me in a week and let me know. And almost every patient had an improvement of some sort. And I was like, wow. And then I started like writing down all of, the stuff I came across. And I was like, this is like, and it was coming up more and more and more. And then I put all my attention into it. And I just kept this running kind of spreadsheet of all the different things I had picked up from the research. And I thought, this is not really public information. Like I hadn't heard much about it. I'm on social media. I didn't see much about it. And I was thinking, I think people need to be more aware of this mineral and how important it is to our health and to our wellness. It really is an essential mineral.
It's
Yeah.
so funny that chiropractors, naturopaths are so aligned in something happened to them, a family member or a patient, which is really an extension of our family. That really differs us from a lot of other practitioners. So it's exhilarating to hear that you found it through a patient, if you will, patient case studies, those empirical research, and the data is there. And I'm really happy that you brought this to the forefront because anywhere I go, if the word magnesium comes up, it's associated with you in a positive light. So keep on your path, keep going. It's been great that you were able to take some time to share with everybody. We have to have magnesium, the miracle mineral, part 2.
Absolutely. I could talk about this mineral all day. And just to give you an idea of how much research is out there, there's like to date over 120,000 publications. And it is pretty much on everything. And that's because it's involved in so many enzymatic reactions. So it's a cofactor for so many things. And we're just now learning more and more about it. So it would be my pleasure.
800, not 300 like I thought, not 600, which I was scared to do in a post, but 800. Wow.
Yes, that research came out December 2023. Yeah.
Outstanding. Thanks again so
Yeah.
much, Dr.
Thank
Barb.
you.
You're a superstar.